Welcome back to Filling in the History. I am the amateur historian. Very good to see you again. We are going to be exploring Latter-day Saint Church history through the lens of the Joseph Smith papers here. And I wanted to bring up this book. This was the very first one that I got. Again, I may have shown you this before, but my mom even put some notes in here because it was a present. This is Revelation book. This is the facsimile edition, the very first of the Revelation series. And you have seen it all. I almost forgot to mention, as of section 106, this book is done, which means we have gone through the entirety of Revelation books 1 and 2. So you've seen it all. I almost forgot to mention that. Today, what we're going to be doing is moving on to sections 111 to 114, which involves, unfortunately, some kind of nasty stuff that happens in 1836, in 1837, and in 1838. We get a lot of dissent. We get Joseph getting into arguments, being accused of some things that hold to this day. There's a lot of things that happen in this time. It's a very tough time in the history of the church. So I wanted to tip my hat to the Revelation books, and now we're going to dive into some gristy stuff. When we last left our heroes, we were just starting on section 111, so we are in 1836. The earliest copy of this that we get is in W.W. Phelps's diary, and it is in the handwriting of William W. Phelps, and it's a very clean copy. We also get a version of this section in the Book of the Law of the Lord, and the handwriting in this thing, as I think I've said it before, is gorgeous, and it is Robert B. Thompson's penmanship. We also get a copy in Erastus Snow's journal in his own hand, and we get some other histories that were collected mostly after Joseph Smith's death. And so, circumstantial introductions to this, the earliest copy that we get gives us this as an introduction. It says, a revelation, Salem, Massachusetts, August 6th, 1836. The Book of the Law of the Lord gives the same thing. Erastus Snow does what I would have done, say that it was in Kirtland just out of habit. So he says Kirtland, Ohio. He strikes that out and just says, a revelation given August 6th, 1836 in Salem, Massachusetts. I would have made the same mistake. Oh yeah, everything happens in Kirtland. But not this time. The current section headings that we have from our current Doctrine and Covenants, so this is 1981, 2013, totally the same. We're just not referencing History of the Church, which now we are in History of the Church, Volume 2. The historical introduction from the Joseph Smith papers gives us this. This is where we're coming up to. On the 25th of July, 1836, after writing 2 letters concerning church members in Missouri, Joseph Smith, Hiram Smith, Oliver Cowdery, and Sidney Rigdon left Kirtland, Ohio, to travel to the eastern United States, briefly visiting New York City and Boston, and staying in Salem, Massachusetts, before returning to Kirtland in mid-September. Salem, which was officially incorporated as a city in May 1836, which is crazy because of the Salem witch trials, but anyway, was described by Oliver Cowdery as a, quote, pleasantly situated town with 15,000 inhabitants, unquote. Located on Massachusetts Bay, about 15 miles north of the larger city of Boston. Salem's busy port held a prominent place in the domestic and international commercial shipping trade of the United States. Joseph Smith and his 3 companions arrived in Salem on the 5th of August and rented a house on Union Street for 3 weeks. The house may have been where Joseph Smith dictated this revelation a day later. So a footnote for this introduction says, this was Joseph Smith's second trip to Salem. He had first visited the city as a young boy with his uncle Jesse Smith while recovering from leg surgery to remove diseased bone. So if you recall, we talked about this in an earlier setting. This is a very famous story about how Joseph had to get some diseased bone extracted from him while he was fully conscious. He just wanted to hold his father, and that would be okay. Now, at the time, and this held for a long time, is that if he could get to a better climate or something like that, he would go to his Uncle Jesse's house. And if you remember from a previous episode, he actually wrote a letter to his Uncle Jesse that eventually convinced his uncle to join the church. So this, to me, is a very interesting circle being completed for the life of Joseph Smith. Not a lot is officially known about why they were there, so we get this from the historical introduction. No known contemporary documents specify church leaders' reasons for visiting the eastern United States, and a few records discuss this trip. The main contemporary sources of information are two letters written by Oliver Cowdery to his brother Warren A. Cowdery, which were published in the church's newspaper, and a letter Joseph Smith wrote to his wife, Emma, while in Salem. Oliver Cowdery's letters indicate that their time in New England was spent preaching and occasionally visiting historic places. The four church leaders were likely motivated by a concern about Zion and the financial situation of the church, particularly a need to reduce debts of church leaders. So there were two reasons, as per the usual, for this mission. So we get this. Joseph Smith and his colleagues may have raised money as they preached during their trip east in 1836, as it was not uncommon for missionaries to have the dual objectives of proselytizing and collecting funds for the church. This 6th of August revelation addresses the church's leaders' financial concerns. It informed the men that they would have the power to pay their debts and instructed them to, quote, concern not yourselves about Zion, for there were people and money in Salem for the benefit of Zion. Now, what we get from this is that this is some sort of a treasure-seeking endeavor. So people might be making some of that stuff up, so I will just share with you what the Joseph Smith Papers editors have shared. Related to the Revelation statement that there was much treasure in Salem, two later accounts from individuals not directly involved in the journey state that Joseph Smith traveled to the eastern United States to search for treasure or hidden money. In an 1843 pamphlet, 16-year-old dissident James C. Brewster briefly mentioned treasure hunting in relation to Joseph Smith's 1836 trip. Ebenezer Robinson wrote an account in 1889, 53 years after Joseph Smith's trip, that also linked the 1836 trip and searching for treasure. In fact, he claimed that the single objective of the trip was to look for hidden money in Salem. Robinson printed his account as the editor of The Return, a publication for David Whitmer's Church of Christ. Robinson, who joined the Church of the Latter-day Saints in 1836 while working in the Kirtland printing office, stated in his reminiscence that Don Carlos Smith, who worked with him, told him that Joseph Smith had learned about possible treasure from a brother in the church by the name of Burgess, who had come to Kirtland and stated that a large amount of money had been secreted in the cellar of a certain house in Salem, Massachusetts, which had belonged to a widow, and he thought he was the only person now living who had knowledge of it, or the location of the house. Robinson claimed he was also told that Burgess met Joseph Smith in Salem, but that Burgess was unable to identify the house after so many years and left. Continuing their search, according to Robinson, Joseph Smith and three other men found and rented a house they thought contained the hidden money, but they were unsuccessful in finding it. So there's a lot of stuff here that's like people weren't even there, or if they were there, or maybe they were around somebody who was there, it was like many years later. Anyway, so we get a footnote for this introduction. As a young man in Kirtland in 1837, Brewster claimed to have visions of ancient scriptures, and he and his small group of followers were disfellowshipped. He published his extra scriptural book of Esdras in 1842, which was the subject of a notice written by editor John Taylor in the December 1842 issue of the Times and Seasons. Responding to Taylor's description of treasure hunting as a ridiculous and pernicious practice, Brewster wrote, quote, "I would ask him who was the author of this practice among the Mormons. If he has a good memory, he will remember the house that was rented in the city of Boston with the expectation of finding a large sum of money buried in or near the cellar," unquote. Okay, little fighting words there. So we're hunting for treasure. It says this: it is possible that Joseph Smith had been told about hidden money in Salem and decided to pursue it to aid the church and relieve the financial and temporal pressure weighing down the branches in Kirtland and Missouri. And two contemporary documents may provide support for the statements of Brewster and Robinson. First, a promissory note was made out to a Jonathan Burgess in Salem, a tentative connection to the Burgess of Robinson's account. Second, Joseph Smith mentioned looking for a specific house in Salem in his 19 of August letter to Emma Smith. Robinson's account stated that Joseph Smith rented the house and failed to find any treasure, but Joseph Smith's letter to Emma reveals that he had not been able to rent or gain access to the house. While Joseph Smith seemed hopeful the situation would change, The men left Salem only a few days later and offered no indication that they had rented or even visited the sought-after house, nor is there any evidence that they later returned. Um, so it's kind of an iffy one, and this is in the section heading of this. So it's kind of a funny story that there's really not a lot of solid evidence behind the story regarding treasure seeking. So we get this. This revelation was not published in Joseph Smith's lifetime. It first appeared in print in the 1850s with the printing of the History of Joseph Smith in the Deseret News and the Millennial Star. It was first included in the Doctrine and Covenants in the 1876 edition, and the canonized version follows the text of the Phelps inscription that is featured here that we will be reading from. So a lot to do with this, but yeah, treasure seeking rears its head once again. I'm shocked to hear that the Painesville Telegraph was nowhere to be found here. But yeah, that's kind of why we're here in Salem, Massachusetts. So let's talk about some content and footnotes. We get this. The beginning of the Revelation says this. I, the Lord your God, am not displeased with your coming this journey, notwithstanding your follies. I have much treasure in this city for you, for the benefit of Zion, and many people in this city whom I will gather out in due time for the benefit of Zion, through your instrumentality. Therefore it is expedient that you should form acquaintance with men in this city, as you shall be led, and as it shall be given you. So footnote 2 for this says, one way Joseph Smith and his companions may have tried to accomplish this directive to make acquaintances in the Salem-Boston area was by holding meetings. Their most publicized meeting in Salem was held at the Lyceum Hall on the 20th of August, where Rigdon spoke on Christianity. The Essex Register described Rigdon favorably as, quote, a man of very respectable appearance and very fluent in his language, unquote. Several Salem and Boston newspapers mentioned the meeting. The men also held several meetings in Boston after leaving Salem. Now, there's a strange passage that I see here, and it says this. It says, it shall come to pass in due time that I will give this city unto your hands, that you shall have power over it, insomuch that they shall not discover your secret parts, and its wealth, pertaining to gold and silver, shall be yours. Footnote 3 for this says, a blessing given to Hiram Smith by Joseph Smith on the 18th of December, 1833, stated, quote, he shall be hid by the hand of the Lord, that none of his secret parts shall be discovered unto his hurt, unquote. So I guess pertaining to, like, we all make mistakes, and those are not going to be sent out in the open or something, but it's a very strange passage. The final words that we get from this revelation are, it's not a very long revelation, it says, tarry in this place, and in the regions round about, and the place where it is my will that you should tarry, for the main shall be signalized unto you by the peace and power of my spirit, that shall flow unto you. This place you may obtain by hire, etc., and inquire diligently concerning the more ancient inhabitants and founders of this city. For there are more treasures than one for you in this city. Therefore be ye as wise as serpents, and yet without sin, and I will order all things for your good as fast as ye are able to receive them. Amen. Footnote 6 for this says, Joseph Smith, Hiram Smith, Oliver Cowdery, and Sidney Rigdon visited museums and historic sites in Salem and Boston. On the day that Joseph Smith dictated the revelation, Rigdon and Cowdery toured the East India Marine Society Museum and signed the guest register. How on earth do you go find a guest register? Anyway, whatever. Joseph Smith visited the same museum on the 9th of August. Cowdery and possibly the other men also visited places in Salem related to the 17th century witchcraft trials. They also visited the Boston Naval Yard, Bunker Hill, and the ruins of the Charlestown Ursuline Convent, which had been destroyed by a mob in 1834. So there you go. Section 1114. Some guy somewhere found some book with Joseph Smith's signature in it. My goodness, like, talk about the most random thing to find. These Joseph Smith papers, people, are for real. Anyway, let's go through some more history here. So we're going to fill in some stuff. After this revelation, we get licenses galore and various members doing various things. I'll use Edison Barney as an example just to kind of show you what this is, but seriously, rinse and repeat this in the Kirtland Elders Certificates book. And very much thanks to Thomas Burdick for writing a zillion of these things. I mean, there are so many of them. We then get a letter to Joseph Smith, which is in Joseph Smith's hands. So let's read it. This is from Salem, Massachusetts. We've already talked about it. August 19, 1836. It says this. My beloved wife, Brother Hiram is about to start for home before the rest of us. A little redundant there. Which seems wisdom in God, as our business here cannot be determined as soon as we could wish to have it. I thought a line from me by him would not be acceptable to you, even if it did contain but little, that you may know that you and the children are much on my mind. With regard to that great object of our mission, you will be anxious to know we have found the house since Brother Burgess left us, very luckily and providentially, as we had one spell been most discouraged. But the house is occupied, and it will require much care and patience to rent or buy it. We think we shall be able to effect it, if not now, within the course of a few months. We think we shall be at home about the middle of September. I can think of many things concerning our business, but can only pray that you may have wisdom to manage the concerns that involve on you, and want you should believe me that I am your sincere friend and husband, in haste, yours, etc. Joseph Smith Jr. Footnote 3 for this says, he doesn't really get into the nitty-gritties, but it says this. Joseph Smith's reluctance to discuss the business concerns on his mind mirrors his decision in an earlier letter to Emma, in which he wrote that he felt it was not prudent to write on such matters. In that letter, he told her, quote, I omit all the important things which I see you and I could make you acquainted with, unquote. He'd rather just say it in person. Makes sense. All right, after this letter, we get a host of licenses. We get a ton of land deals. We get promissory notes all over the place. We get the largest land purchase that Joseph Smith has ever been involved with in Ohio, and that is the Peter French Farm, which they officially purchased on the 15th of October, 1836. So you see that all over in the scriptures. The Kirtland Temple is situated on a part of that original Peter French Farm. We get even more licenses. We get deeds. And then we get something called the Constitution of the Kirtland Safety Society Bank. This is on the 2nd of November. And this institution eventually failed after becoming what's called an anti-banking institution because it couldn't get a charter. But I found this interesting. Only one institution made it through the system in Ohio due to the makeup of the legislature in the 1836 and 1837. So there was a lot of banks that actually wanted to become charters, and they weren't issuing anything to anybody. There was this idea that everything needs to be hard cash, or what they used to call specie. And that sort of faction of people were just overrunning Ohio legislatures, and so nobody got through. So it wasn't just the church. And a lot of people predicted that the Kirtland Safety Society would fail, and it did. And that caused major rifts, and we're going to get into a few of those through this whole thing. So instead of being a bank, which means you need a charter, they just became an anti-banking institution. But the problem is that Oliver Cowdery already went to Pittsburgh and got some plates, and they went to New York and got some materials. And the plates they used to print their own promissory notes, or, we would call them today Federal Reserve notes, but we'll get into that in a second. Anyway, so we get a lot more licenses. We get deeds. We get, and so we get a lot of this stuff. We get something called an indenture, which is very interesting. This is a way for a younger person to become an apprentice and learn the craft at the hands of somebody else in their town. So it does imply that they're not really getting paid. That's why it's called an indenture. So if you're an indentured servant, you're not necessarily getting paid. But in this case, they were using it to train, which is interesting. We get a meeting on the 22nd of December. It's published in the Messenger and Advocate. And it resolves unanimously to stop the practice of dumping the care of your poor onto Kirtland. Local congregations cannot just send off members that are having hard times to Kirtland for them to take care of the whole thing. You need to do this locally. And they resolved to stop sending people without proper preparations first so that things could be done in order. And this is one of the major reasons why the church was suffering so much financially. In Kirtland, I should say. And the very last thing we get in 1836 is a license for Daniel Carter. And this one is kind of fun. It's held in the archives of the Daughters of the Utah Pioneers. It is signed by Frederick G. Williams and Joseph Smith. So that is all that we have for part one. So if you stick with us, we're going to be getting into a little bit more of 1837, and we'll get into section 112. So stick with us. All right, now we're in part 2. This is going to be what I like to call 1837 and section 112. So happy New Year. It is 1837. Now, 1836 has 482 documents that we still have in the Joseph Smith papers. And we get to 1837 and we get 85. Way less. Part of this is because we don't have a trillion licenses to be dishing out. But the other reason why is Joseph kind of had to skip town because things were getting a little rough. And so there wasn't quite so much recording going on. There was a lot of descendants, that's not right. Dissidents is how you say that. And so people weren't really doing their callings. And so we weren't getting a lot of documentation. We're going to get to that at the end of this as well. Anyway, I should also mention here that we are going to be, in this episode, tearing through volumes 4 and 5 of the document series of the Joseph Smith papers. So if you're thinking of this as an audiobook, we're basically going to make it all the way through volumes 4, volume 5, and a portion of volume 6. So look at how much time you're saving. That's 3 very large volumes that this guy with 2 thumbs had to read through, and you don't. So you're welcome from us here at Filling in the History. Anyway, let's start with 1837, and we get the Articles of Agreement for the Kirtland Safety Society. This is printed in the Messenger and Advocate, and it sets out a few rules for the bank. And we also get some currency from this bank. And I think this is kind of fun. So here you get a $1 bill, you get a $2 bill, you get a $3 bill. You ever seen a $3 bill? Well, this is your lucky freaking day. We also get a $5 bill, which is nice. We get a $10 bill, we got a 20, and we get the old C note. We get a $100 bill. And I really am liking this because if this artwork on this $100 bill looks familiar, it is because it is the same thing that is printed on the back of the current $2 bill, which I find very interesting. Now, what these are is money back then actually was signed by people. How annoying is that, right? So today, our money is just passed back and forth, and they're not owed to anybody in particular. But as you can see here, like these are notes. These are like debt notes that says, hey, this person is owed $100 from this bank if he asks for it, and it's signed by, members of the bank, which is Joseph Smith in this case is one of those. All right, so that's what you get. Those are the currencies: 1, 2, 3, 5, 10, 20, and 100. And the backs of them don't really have a whole lot on them either. Anyway, so there you go. All right, we get even more licenses. We get deeds, we get promissory notes, and the like. And then we get a discourse from Joseph Smith on the 7th anniversary of the organization of the church. So this is on April 6th, 1837. Meet together, have a solemn assembly, which is what we would call a fast meeting today. And they perform the washing of feet. The presidencies received some instructions and a few corrections were made. Joseph spoke on priesthood organization and authority, and he did not speak too much about a hierarchy of authority for the quorums or anything like that. So he wasn't talking about this presidency's over that one or this group's over that one. That wasn't mentioned. After this meeting, we get a ton of deeds for land sales, promissory notes. We get a few letters. We get one letter from Newell K. Whitney talking about some legal issues Joseph was facing in Kirtland while he was away to somewhere. We actually don't really know where he went, but he was out of town. And this man by the name of Grandison Newell accused Joseph Smith of trying to have him killed. And this was not really good for a man's reputation in town, so Joseph Smith was kind of in trouble there. And then there was also an issue of Timothy Martindale taking him to task over a $5,000 unpaid debt over some land. And some writs for arrest were sent out. Now, this eventually led to the Newell issue, the Grandison Newell issue, being sort of delayed in court. This whole idea of like, you're trying to kill me. I guess he got to stay on that, and they sort of settled that later. And then there was a court case with Martindale. It was settled out of court. And we kind of assume because there's no record of any land sales that Martindale just took his land back. So that's the end of that. So Newell K. Whitney is sort of sharing this with Joseph while he was away. And it was sent to upstate New York, where we think he was kind of hanging out with around the Martin Harris area of New York State. Anyway, we also get a letter from Emma. That is not the most positive thing to read. And it starts this way, to give you an example. Dear husband, your letter was welcomed both by friends and foes. We were glad enough to hear that you was well, and our enemies think they have almost found you by seeing where the letters were mailed. We are all well, as usual, except mother is not quite as well as common. Our family is small, and yet I have a great deal of business to see to. Brother Tenny has not moved yet, and he does not know when he will. We have taken possession of all the room we could get. So you can see, people are intercepting letters, trying to find out where Joseph is. They're trying to etch out some sort of a living where they are. It's kind of tough. And the letter ends with this. I verily feel that if I had no more confidence in God than some I could name, I should be in a sad case indeed, but I still believe that if we humble ourselves and are faithful, as we can be, we shall be delivered from every snare that may be laid for our feet, and our lives and property will be saved, and we redeemed from all unreasonable encumbrances. My time is out. I pray that God will keep you in purity and safety till we meet again. Emma Smith. Kind of a bad situation. We're going to get into another letter here in just a second. We do get a license to Lorenzo Snow, which is kind of fun because he's later the president of the church, which uses language hinting that Lorenzo is kind of new to the church. And we're welcoming you into the church and also giving you a calling. However, just so that you know, this also matches language given to Joseph Smith himself. So that's just kind of how licenses were written. So I thought for a second, I was like, wow, this is Lorenzo Snow, like joining the church and all that stuff. But I was mistaken. It was just the two sort of matching language, with what we already have. We then get another letter from Emma, and she is a lot more desperate for correspondence from Joseph at this point about money matters, about business. She can't seem to hold on to any money because anybody who wants a cut, so she can't get any food. So like she'll get some money and somebody comes around and like, that's mine. I want my money back. Your husband owes me, blah, blah, blah. She couldn't get any food. She couldn't get any grain from anywhere. And it was a bad deal. So she was suggesting that they really, really needed a power of attorney to protect them from all this. And she suggests Vincent Knight to try to alleviate all of this. So that letter is a bad news situation, is what that was. We then get a map of Kirtland City. It's kind of fun. And we get a few other papers. And then we get a letter from Parley P. Pratt, which is actually published in a paper in 1888. And since we don't have the original, we don't know. But some contemporary accounts seem to have left out some things like that he put in a testimony of the Book of Mormon and the Doctrine and Covenants. And so there might be some things that were modified here. But the historical introduction gives a great summary here. So I'm just going to read that. Fearing the financial ruin of losing his house and land, Pratt wrote this letter to Joseph Smith, threatening to bring charges against him for extortion, covetousness, and taking advantage through religious influence. Pratt never formally made these charges. However, his brother Orson Pratt and fellow apostle Lyman Johnson brought similar charges against Joseph Smith 6 days later. On the 29th of May, on the same day, Parley P. Pratt and 4 other prominent men in the church were called before the High Council for actions, quote, injurious to the Church of God, unquote. Pratt's discontent with Joseph Smith over financial matters continued into June of 1837, when he gave a discourse criticizing Joseph Smith and the church before leaving for Missouri. While traveling, he met Marsh, Patten, and William Smith, who were heading to Kirtland. Marsh persuaded Pratt to return with them. Once he arrived in Kirtland, Pratt reconciled himself with Joseph Smith. According to Pratt's autobiography, quote, I went to Brother Joseph Smith in tears, and with a broken heart and contrite spirit confessed wherein I had erred in spirit, murmured or done or said amiss. He frankly forgave me, prayed for me, and blessed me, unquote. Pratt also made an acknowledgement of his faults in a Sunday meeting in Kirtland of 9th of July, before setting off with his family to proselytize in New York. Heck of a story. So, but this is a published thing. Now, what's interesting about this is what you get here. Warren Parrish took a letter that he wrote, plus this letter from Parley P. Pratt, and published them in a newspaper not owned by the church called Zion's Watchman, which is why it finds its way into this article, which is called Naked Truths About Mormonism, again from 1888, which is published in Oakland, California. So this is way later. So yeah, there's some question about the contents of this, but yeah, it was pretty harsh language. So very interesting letter from an apostle. But this is the kind of conflict that we're running into right now in the church at the time. More documents follow, and then we get a letter from somebody by the name of Abel Lamb and a few others where they feel that Frederick G. Williams, Lyman Johnson, Parley Pratt, and Warren Parrish should be called to the High Council for injuries against the church. And as you will see later on, excommunications and disfellowshippments start happening. So things are getting real. We do get charges against Joseph Smith written in the hand of Warren Parrish. Read these off to you. It says, "To the bishop and his council in Kirtland, the stake of Zion, we prefer the following charges against President Joseph Smith Jr., viz., for lying and misrepresenting, also for extortion, and for speaking disrespectfully against his brethren behind their backs. Lyman E. Johnson, Orson Pratt." So, yeah, getting even more real. We get some recommendations, we get land agreements, and we get a public letter from W.W. Phelps in the Messenger and Advocate that shares the progress on the city goings-on and some debts being paid off. So that's nice. Seems like we're kind of mixing our messages here. Anyway, we get the House of the Lord in Kirtland being mortgaged to Meade, Stanford & Co. on the 11th of July, 1837. So I'm just going to say this again. They're so desperate for money and raising money that they decide to mortgage the Kirtland Temple to a firm in New York. This nearly cost the church the building itself, but they desperately needed the money to pay off the debts that they had. And if you remember from a previous episode, this is where Brother Tanner shows up with a lot of cash and actually pays that mortgage off and saves the temple. So, lest it would have been torn down or whatever, like, you can thank Brother Tanner once again for this. And I may also add, thank you to Meade, Stanford & Co. for believing in these men enough to help them get through it. So I know it's not maybe what you want to do, but they did all that they could do. We also get some promissory notes to follow these that these men entered into, which makes a lot of sense. And then we get Section 112. So quite a crazy year so far. So let's get into this. As you've seen already, there's a lot of crap going on, like just throwing back and forth. If that's too graphic of an image for you, I'm sorry. The earliest copy of this is actually in Joseph Smith's journal that covers a period from March to September of 1838. It is in the handwriting of James Mulholland. And the whole thing kind of seems to be crossed out. And I'm seeing this a lot lately. It's like little slashes through things. There is another copy that we find in a letter from Violet Kimball to her husband, Heber C. Kimball. The only thing that we have of that is a photocopy of the letter, so the original is lost, but thank heaven somebody photocopied it. We get it on a loose paper, a copy that is in just an unknown hand. This is held in the Community of Christ archives. Actually, not sure who wrote this, but it's a legitimate copy, so here we have it. We get 5 loose pages that were from Thomas B. Marsh with this revelation in his own hand. We get a copy in Brigham Young's journal. We get a copy in Wilford Woodruff's Book of Revelations. We get a copy in Willard Richards' Pocket Companion. Heber C. Kimball has a copy in his journal. William W. Phelps has a copy in his own hand. And just so that you know, the Revelation is published in the 1844 Doctrine and Covenants, but that was released after Joseph's death. And we also get some histories that cover this. So, everybody's got a copy of this. And if you notice, Brigham Young, Wilford Woodruff, Willard Richards, Heber Kimball, these are apostles. Because this revelation is intended specifically for Thomas B. Marsh, who is the president of the Quorum of the 12 and the members of that quorum. So let's get into the circumstantial introduction to this. Joseph Smith's journal simply gives us this. A revelation given Kirtland, July 23rd, 1837. The word of the Lord unto Thomas B. Marsh concerning the 12 apostles of the Lamb. We get the exact same introduction in Violet's letter letter. Brigham Young's journal, Wilford Woodruff's Book of Revelation, Richard's Pocket Companion, and Kimball's journal. So everybody kind of copies this introduction. Now, the unidentified scribe, the mystery person here, writes this. Kirtland, Cayuga County, Ohio, July 23rd, 1837. The word of the Lord unto Thomas B. Marsh concerning the 12. And that's it. Now, President Marsh's copy has the exact same thing. So there's kind of two introductions here. The third version of this, William W. Phelps, is a little different. It says Revelation to Thomas B. Marsh concerning the 12 apostles of the Lord, given in Kirtland, July 23rd, 1837. So there's your contemporary introductions. We do have some differences in the modern section headings. In 1981, it says, the word of the Lord unto Thomas B. Marsh concerning the 12 apostles of the Lamb. Sound familiar? The prophet records that this revelation was received on the day on which the gospel was first preached in England. Thomas B. Marsh was at this time president of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles. The 2013 edition is a little different. It says, this revelation was received on the day elders Heber C. Kimball and Orson Hyde first preached the gospel in England. Thomas B. Marsh was at this time president of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles. Quite different. All right, so a little bit more. Historical introduction. We got some trouble here. Apostles Marsh, David W. Patten, and William Smith traveled from far west Missouri to Kirtland, Ohio, in the summer of 1837 to address quorum members' dissent against Joseph Smith and seek to unify the 12. To these ends, Marsh and Patten called for a council meeting of the entire Quorum of the 12 on the 24th of July, 1837. Marsh, Patten, and Smith arrived in Kirtland on the 8th of July, but they found that Joseph Smith and the church presidency had sent 2 of the 12, Heber C. Kimball and Orson Hyde, to proselytize in England in mid-June. Marsh saw this as his responsibility to direct members of the 12 to preach in foreign lands. He had corrected Parley P. Pratt for planning to undertake a mission to England in May, and he may have harbored some frustration that he was not consulted regarding the mission. The 23rd July revelation assured Marsh that he was chosen to lead the 12 and to spread the gospel abroad among all nations, but made it clear that he should do so under the direction of the first presidency. So that's one thing, and that seems to be cleared away, and I love that. Like, let's come together. I'm kind of ready to boil over here, and they get a revelation, and they're like, "Oh, okay." Like, it's incredible that people would think this way. I don't know. Very easy way to solve your problems. But we got even more trouble. So from the historical introduction, the revelation also addressed dissent, which had intensified among some church members in mid-1837. It troubled Marsh that several of the 12 had been involved in the discord. By early May, he and Patten had heard rumors in Far West that apostles John F. Boynton and Luke and Lyman Johnson were speaking out in opposition to Joseph Smith and other leaders. Lyman Johnson, Orson Pratt, and Luke Johnson had preferred charges against Joseph Smith and his father in late May. In June, Parley P. Pratt had preached against Joseph Smith before leaving for Missouri. Reflecting in January 1838 on growing unrest, Violet Murray Kimball wrote in a letter to her husband Heber that she felt the dissenters had valid reasons for their frustrations, but that they had nonetheless pursued an improper course of action. Quote, now, after all that I have said about this dissenting party, there is some of them that I love and have great feeling and pity for them. I know they have been tried to the very quick, but that grieves me that most of all is that many things which they tell, I have no doubt but what are too true. Still, I do not think they are justifiable in the course they have taken. Unquote. So it's okay to have a problem. It's not okay to flap your lips out loud like that, or so publicly, or whatever the case may be. So further into this, we get the original manuscript of the Revelation, as written by Marsh, has not been found, but several copies are extant. The earliest version was copied by Violet Kimball into a 6th of September letter she had sent to her husband, Heber. Violet wrote that she had copied the Revelation from Elder Marsh's book as he wrote it from Joseph's mouth. She also provided additional details regarding the revelation, which Marsh had discussed with her. According to Violet, Joseph Smith had told Marsh at the time of the revelation that the door of proclamation could not be effectually opened until Marsh went to England or sent someone he had ordained for that purpose. But Joseph Smith had instructed him not to include this in his transcript in the 23rd of July revelation. Heber, who was now in England proselytizing, responded to Marsh's claims by telling Violet that Valete, I keep saying that wrong, Valete is her name, that Joseph Smith had told him it was all right to prepare the way for Brother Marsh, as John was the forerunner of Christ to prepare before him to baptize, and that despite what Marsh thought, that the missionaries would have little success without his direction. Those preaching in England had already baptized many people in their short time there. Unfortunately, a page has been lost from Valate's 6th of September letter, and her copy of the Revelation is incomplete, which is why we use this other one. And so several of the 12 made their own copies for the missions, which is why we have so many. So before they left, they took copies with them. So content and footnote, there's not a lot of usable footnotes here. It's mostly references to scriptures and other revelations. So the opening of it says this, Verily I say unto you, there have been some few things in thine heart and with thee, with which I the Lord was not well pleased. Nevertheless, inasmuch as thou hast abased thyself, thou shalt be exalted. Therefore all thy sins are forgiven thee. Let thy heart be of good cheer before my face, and thou shalt bear record of my name not only unto the Gentiles, but also unto the Jews, and thou shalt send forth my word unto the ends of the earth. Contend thou therefore morning by morning, and day after day, let thy warning voice go forth. And when the night cometh, let not the inhabitants of the earth slumber because of thy speech. Let thy habitation be known in Zion, and remove not thy house. For I the Lord have a great work for thee to do, in publishing my name among the children of men. Therefore gird up your loins for the work. So, we further get into this as, Now I say unto you, and what I say unto you, I say unto all the 12, Arise and gird up your loins, take up your cross, follow me, and feed my sheep. Exalt not yourselves, rebel not against my servant Joseph. For verily I say unto you, I am with him, and my hand shall be over him. And the keys which I have given him, and also to you word, shall not be taken from him until I come. Now, there is an intention here that the beatings will continue until the morality improves, but it's going to start in our own house. So we get this from the Revelation. A day of desolation, of weeping, of mourning, and of lamentation, as a whirlwind it shall come upon all the face of the earth, saith the Lord. And upon my house shall it begin, and from my house shall it go forth, saith the Lord. First among those among you, saith the Lord, who have professed to know my name, and have not known me, and have blasphemed against me in the midst of my house, saith the Lord. Footnote 25 to this says, This may be a reference to dissenters, such as Warren Parrish, who spoke against Joseph Smith in the house of the Lord in mid-June of 1837. So inside of the Kirtland Temple, he gives a speech. And this, I would say, is probably a reference to that, partially. Revelation ends with this. Cleanse your hearts and your garments, lest the blood of this generation be required at your hands. Be faithful until I come, for I come quickly, and my reward is with me to recompense every man according to as his work shall be. I am Alpha and Omega. Amen. And the reason why I read all of that, biggest reason why I read all of that, is because you're going to see this sort of cleansing of dissent and putting people down, like I said, disfellowship, excommunications fly in 1837. And I believe a lot of it is from this language. So I just wanted to tee that up as we get into the next portion of this. So stick around for part 3 and a little bit more filling in the history. Okay, part 3, this is actually not going to have any published revelations, wink, wink. This is going to be 1837 and early 1838, and the struggles therein is how I'm going to call this. So we're going to start in 1837 with a lot of pay orders, promissory notes, a notice in the paper that people putting out fake money will be prosecuted, and that it is against good society and religion. And that statement comes from Joseph Smith. I thought that was a very kind way of ending a very large rebuke about counterfeiting funds. Anyway, we get more ordinations, we get promissory notes. We get a meeting on September 3rd where Joseph and the presidency of the church are called up and sustained in their callings. Bishop and apostles are sustained. 3 members of the 12 are disfellowshipped. So Luke Johnson, Lyman Johnson, and John F. Boynton, you are out. And also 3 members of the Kirtland High Council were removed, and this includes Martin Harris. And a host of things because of that are set in order. So people have to be replaced. and all sorts of stuff like that. A lot of dissent at the time is being put down. We get a letter sent to John Corral, which is really to all the saints in Missouri to encourage them to regulate themselves, keep things moving in the right direction in their faith. And Joseph's going to pay them a visit and sort of set the record straight there. Then we get an unpublished revelation. Oh, yeah. So this is out of Joseph Smith's journal. That's really kind of a revelation book for the time. This is in the handwriting of George W. Robinson. And the entire text reads thusly. Revelation to Joseph Smith, Jr., given in Kirtland, Geauga County, Ohio, September 4th, 1837. Making known that the transgression of John Whitmer, William or W. Phelps, verily thus saith the Lord unto you, my servant Joseph, my servants John Whitmer and William W. Phelps have done things which are not pleasing in my sight. Therefore, if they repent not, they shall be removed out of their places. Amen. Joseph Smith, Jr. So that's nice and vague, and there is also no footnotes. So we're going to have to get some context of this out of the historical introduction. So we get this. In August of 1836, William Phelps and John Whitmer selected a 640-acre site for the new gathering place for the saints in Missouri. The site, known as Far West, was located in what would become Caldwell County. Using funds obtained from saints in Kentucky and Tennessee, Phelps and Whitmer purchased an additional 1,240 acres between early November 1836 and the end of January of 1837. The pushed forward an ambitious plan for building Far West, including laying out the city plat and making plans to build a house of the Lord. They did so without consulting the church presidency or even other local religious authorities such as the bishopric and high council, which caused concern among the Missouri High Council. I think that's putting it lightly. This turns into a church court. They actually confess to this. They stand corrected by the council. However, the accusations kept going when they find out when they sold the land, they actually kept the money. And that surfaced because obviously it was given to them by the church. So got some money problems here. And we'll see what this leads in a second. So remember those names. William W. Phelps, John Whitmer are on the list. So remember that letter that we got from Emma wanting to get a power of attorney sorted out? Well, they wound up doing that, and they chose Hiram Smith to do that, and they signed their names to it. So that's what you see here. We get a meeting on the 17th of September where callings were made, new assignments were given, little squiggly line through this one kind of struck through. There's a second part of that meeting, still has lines going through it, but the big thing was that Joseph preached about the gathering of Israel and of setting up stakes in the surrounding areas, and 109 elders volunteered to serve missions in that vein, which is a lot of people for this time. They also committed to putting the church's house in order, so to speak. Broadsides were sent out asking for funds to pay church debts, and they started trying to set up new stakes in Zion and in the surrounding areas. It's kind of cool. We get a letter from Wilford Woodruff and Jonathan Hale talking about their missionary endeavors, which was printed in a newspaper called the Elders' Journal. This was a mission to the eastern states, where they made it all the way to Maine, actually. We get some more promissory notes and deeds. Oliver Granger is now given power of attorney for Joseph and Sidney. A little separate here. We then get a first edition of the Elders' Journal, which we partially showed already. And this is going to be a periodical that is used a lot by people out on their missions, which is kind of fun. We get 3 minutes of meetings that are still in our possession today, covering the 6th, 7th, and 10th of November. They talk about a bunch of things. They talk about planning on building a temple in Far West, Missouri. There was talk of organizing new stakes, baptizing more members in the surrounding areas. And we asked the members for money to help pay the church's debts and so forth. So those were 3 days worth of meetings. I am consolidating for the sake of time. We then get a letter from somebody called Benjamin Benson. He is a member of the church. He is living in Missouri, and he recounts a dream that he had. And I thought this was an interesting story. He shares this apparently with Joseph Smith, and then he writes a letter to sort of say, hey, remember when we talked about this? This is the story. And if you want to publish this, feel free. But I don't think it was ever published. And the dream was about, he saw this, basically it was like put on this magical horse and an angel like flies him through to this other area. And he sees a book being brought forth out of the earth. And the angel comes down and tells Benjamin that this is a record of people who were brought here from Jerusalem and were the ancestors of the natives living in the land, or at least some of the ancestors of people who used to live on this land. Benson saw that a man would bring it forth, and he's convinced that that man was Joseph Smith, which is pretty cool. And he mentions that the angel said it was called the Book of Ether, that it talks about those people. So that's pretty cool, especially considering that he had this dream in 1795, which, if my math is correctly, is about 10 years before Joseph Smith is even born. So there's a letter for you. Kind of a fun dream. Moving on, we get a few more papers. We get some Elders Journal publications showing Joseph Smith's mission, Sidney Rigdon's mission. And that is the final printing of 1837. And we will end the year with a discourse that Ezra Strong's notebook has. And there's very nice penmanship. So I'm just going to read a little of this. The text reads this. This is something that Ezra Strong wrote down, a discourse that Joseph gave. So this is the end of 1837. Joseph then spake, as never man had spoken before, showing the love of God, portrayed the gathering together of saints and sinners, drew a figure of the gospel net, in which the good would be with the bad, and of the tares growing with the wheat, and of the saints so living, that the tares, seeing their good works, might be led to glorify God. Joseph said, the duty of the saints is to bind together humanity, to throw round all the arm of love, not to be zealous, for there is a way that seemeth right unto man, but the end thereof is death. Many take the influence of zeal to be the Spirit of God, but it is not. The evil spirits often deceive and lead man astray. They are trying to divide the saints, but we are called upon to hunt for the one that is missing from the fold, whether saint or sinner. And now, brethren, I wish to say something about the Brewster, which is James Brewster, and Norris, Moses Norris, brothers and sisters. I met with them before going to Missouri. The spirit of love, joy, and peace rested on us, and the Holy Ghost bore witness of their faith in God. And now I learn they are all cut off from the church. I want someone to make a motion that all of them be restored to full fellowship, without baptism, as though no action had been taken against them. That's it. There are no footnotes. There is no historical introduction. That's all you get. So thus we end 1837. Now we're in 1838. We get some accounts formed. We get some things canceled because they were paid off, agreements, licenses, and then a letter and a revelation. So the letter to Edward Partridge, which includes a revelation, reads thusly. Says, Kirtland, January 7th, 1838. Brother Partridge, thus saith the Lord, my servant Edward and his house shall be numbered with the blessed, and Abraham their father, and his name shall be had in sacred remembrance. And again thus saith the Lord, let my people be aware of dissensions among them, lest the enemy have power over them. Awake, my shepherds, and warn my people, for behold, the wolf cometh to destroy them. Receive him not. Now I would inform you that my health is good, and also that of my family, and that it is my earnest prayer to God that health, peace, and plenty may crown your board, and blessings of heaven rest upon the head of him in whom the Lord has said there is no guile. So, start with a revelation, end with a letter. The historical introduction for this says, in early November 1837, Joseph Smith and other church leaders visited the burgeoning settlement of Far West, where they regulated church affairs and discussed the creation of new stakes of Zion. After returning to Kirtland, Ohio in early December, Joseph Smith faced renewed opposition from a vocal group of dissenters who denounced him and his supporters. It was in these circumstances, 5 days before relocating to Missouri, that Joseph Smith sent the letter and revelation featured here to Partridge in Far West. Portions of the letter were apparently read aloud at a General Assembly held in Far West on the 5th of February, 1838, in which church members voted to reject the Missouri Church Presidency. Yeah, we'll get to that in a second. This copy that we're reading from is actually a family record and is written by Edward Partridge Jr. about 40 years later, because the original is lost. So that's what you get. After this, we actually get 4 more unpublished revelations. So we get this one from the 7th of January, 1838, in the handwriting of Edward Partridge. The text reads, "Thus saith the Lord, my servant Edward, and his house shall be numbered with the blessed, and Abraham their father, and his name shall be had in sacred remembrance. And again, thus saith the Lord, let my people be aware of dissensions among them, lest the enemy have power over them. Awake my shepherds, and warn my people, for behold, the wolf cometh to destroy them. Receive him not." Kirtland, January 7th, 1838. So very similar to what we already have. The next 3 revelations are all from the 12th of January, 1838. So these are all in the handwriting of George W. Robinson. They're on loose pages, and it says this. And the Joseph Smith paper calls this A, B, and C. First one's a little long. I'll try to get through it. It says, Kirtland, Ohio, January 12th, 1838, in the presence of Joseph Smith Jr., Sidney Rigdon, Vincent Knight, and George G.W. Robinson, at the French farm, the following inquiry was made of the Lord. A question asked of the Lord concerning the trying of the first presidency of the Church of Latter-day Saints for transgression according to the item of law found in the 3rd section of the Book of Covenants, 37 verse. Whether the decision of such an council of one stake shall be conclusive for Zion and all the stake. Answer. Thus saith the Lord, the time is now come when a decision of such an council would not answer for Zion and all her stakes. What will answer for Zion and all her stakes? Answer. Thus saith the Lord, let the first presidency of my church be held in full fellowship in Zion and all her stakes, until they shall be found transgressors by such an high council, as is named in the 3rd section, 37th verse of the Book of Covenants, in Zion, by 3 witnesses standing against each member of said presidency, and said witnesses shall be of long and faithful standing, and such also as cannot be impeached by other witnesses, before said council, and when a decision is had by such a council in Zion, it shall be for Zion. It shall not answer for her stakes. But if said decision be acknowledged by the council of her stakes, then it shall answer for her stakes. But if it is not acknowledged by the stakes, and then such stakes may have the privilege of hearing for themselves, or if said decision shall be acknowledged by a majority of her stakes, then it shall answer for all her stakes. And again, the presidency of said church may be tried by the voice of the whole body of the church of Zion, and the whole body, voice of a majority, of all her stakes. And again, except a majority is had by the voice of the church of Zion, and the majority of her stakes, the charges will be considered not sustained. And in order to sustain such charge or charges before said church of Zion or her stakes, such witnesses must be had as is named above. That is, 3 witnesses, each president that is of long and faithful standing, that cannot be impeached by other witnesses before the church of Zion or her stakes. And all this saith the Lord because of wicked and aspiring men. Let all you are doing be in meekness and humility before me, even so, amen. Wow, that's a lot of legalistic speech, but there you go. Can the first presidency be taken down? Yes, they can, but you better have your story straight, is all that said. So part B. Kirtland, January 12th, 1838. Can the first any branch of the Church of Latter-day Saints be considered a stake of Zion until they have acknowledged the authority of the first presidency by a voice of said church? Thus saith the Lord, verily I say unto you, may. How then? Answer. No stake shall be appointed except by the first presidency, and this presidency be acknowledged by the voice of the same. Otherwise it shall not be counted as a stake of Zion. And again, except it be dedicated by this presidency, it cannot be acknowledged as a stake of Zion. For unto this end I have appointed them, in laying the foundation of and establishing my kingdom. I don't know if we do this today, where you can go like, hey, we're doing a new stake. The first presidency has to be there to oversee it. I think that's the case. But in the reverse, it's the stake has to acknowledge it. So it's got to go in both directions. Thought that was interesting. Part C. Thus saith the Lord, let the presidency of my church take their families as soon as it is practicable, and a door is open for them to move on to the west as fast as the way is made plain before their faces. And let their hearts be comforted, for I will be with them. Verily, I say unto you, the time has come that your labors are finished in this place for a season. Therefore arise and get yourselves on to a land which I shall show you, even a land flowing with milk and honey. You are clean from the blood of this people, And woe unto those who have become your enemies, who have professed my name, saith the Lord. For their judgment lingereth not, and their damnation slumbereth not. Let all your faithful friends arise with their families also, and get out of this place, and gather themselves together unto Zion, and be at peace among yourselves, O inhabitants of Zion, or there shall be no safety for you. Okay, long stuff. But anyway, after this, we get a lot of pay orders. We get a few letters. We get a letter from Oliver Cowdery that is pretty terse and brief, and there's a lot of stuff about, hey, I'm in bad health, and then it concludes this way. Quote, I learned from Kirtland by the last letters that you have publicly said that when you were here, I confessed to you that I had willfully lied about you. This compels me to ask you to correct that statement and give me an explanation, until which you and myself are two, unquote, which means we are not united. So that's a pretty nasty statement all of a sudden from Oliver Cowdery, one of Joseph's closest friends. So let's get a little of the historical introduction here. Cowdery was almost certainly referring to a dispute the two men had regarding Joseph Smith's relationship with Fanny Alger, a young woman who had worked in the Smith household. Cowdery viewed Joseph Smith's relationship with Alger as adulterous, while other church members, including members of Alger's extended family, later stated that Joseph Smith had married Alger as his first plural wife. Now we get into some tough stuff here. So a little further into this from the historical introduction, it says, in at least one of these letters, the brothers asked Oliver about a statement he had allegedly made regarding Joseph Smith's relationship with Fanny Alger. On the 21st of January, Oliver Cowdery wrote a response to Warren Cowdery, prefacing it by inserting, quote, an exact copy, unquote, of the letter to Joseph Smith featured here. In addition to providing further information about his expedition north, his poor health, and his growing disaffection from Joseph Smith and the church, Cowdery confirmed in the letter to his brother that he had, quote, never confessed, intimated, or admitted that I ever willfully lied, quote, unquote, about Joseph Smith and Alger's relationship. So this is something held to this day, the relationship between Joseph Smith and Fanny Alger. We're going to get a little bit more into this as it goes along. But this is a strange one because, again, there's not a whole lot of recorded stuff about, Fanny Alger as a married person, or if there was an adulterous relationship there. It's kind of hard to say. She was very young, and there are a lot of accounts later on that say a lot of this was, whatever it was, seemed to have been consensual. But of course, this is coming from extended family members, so who are you to say? And there's a lot of things surrounding this, but that is the reason for a very terse letter and what I would call the beginning of the end of Oliver Cowdery and Joseph Smith's relationship. So you'll be seeing that, but it's sad. It's a very sad thing that happens there, and a lot of controversy swirling around it, of course. So that is the end of part 3 that we have. Our final part for this is going to be sections 113 and 114, and a lot more from the year 1838. So stay with us. Okay, our final part for today, we're going to be talking about 2 kind of short sections. This is sections 113 and 114. And we get a little bit more from 1838. So we get this letter from Thomas B. Marsh, published in the Elders' Journal, and it's describing conferences held in Missouri and other areas where they're sort of setting things in order and doing as he was commanded in the Section 112 revelation that he received. We get a lot of pay orders. We get licenses. We get a letter from Wilford Woodruff and others on the 9th of March, 1838, which is also published in the Elders' Journal. And it's sharing his travels from their mission to the East and a lot of their successes that they had there. And they also had a lot of opposition. So it describes all of that. We get a meeting on the 15th of March, 1838, and the minutes are really vague. And so I had to turn to the historical introduction on this one, and it says this. On the 15th of March, 1838, Joseph Smith met with the Zion High Council and bishopric. Several developments had occurred since November 1837, when they had last met together. Most significantly, the rift between the presidency of the church in Missouri and the rest of the church leaders had widened. By early 1838, the presidency had been removed from office and replaced by apostles Thomas B. Marsh and David W. Patten. On the 10th of March, former presidency members William W. Phelps and John Whitmer were excommunicated. Then on the 14th of March, Joseph Smith arrived in Far West, where he intended to take up residence. After fleeing Kirtland amid dissent and turmoil, he was determined to root out dissent out of the church. The day after his arrival, Joseph Smith met in council with Missouri church leaders to address matters relevant to the problem of dissent. There's not a lot in the books here, but yeah, William W. Phelps, yeah, that guy, Spirit of God guy, yep. He is excommunicated, and so is John Whitmer. Now, if you don't remember, I did a whole thing about W.W. Phelps in a previous episode. He's been excommunicated like several times and comes back again. I think it's kind of awesome. I wouldn't recommend that to anybody, don't get me wrong, but what a fascinating story. How many times you get kicked out of the church. Anyway, we then get something that I've actually looked forward to for a while here. I actually marked this in one of my books. This is the motto for the church. All right, this is in Joseph Smith's journal, and this is that March to September 1838 journal. The entry may have been on the March 16th or 17th of 1838, but this is, I don't know if you knew this, but there's a motto for the church. It says this: Motto of the Church of Christ of Latter-day Saints. The Constitution of our country formed by the Fathers of Liberty, peace and good order in society, love to God and goodwill to men, all good and wholesome laws, and virtue and truth above all things, and Aristarchy live forever. 3 exclamation points. But woe to tyrants, mobs, aristocracy, anarchy, and Toryism, and all those who invent or seek out unrighteous and vexatious lawsuits under the pretext of color of law or office, either religious or political. Exalt the standard of democracy, down with that of priestcraft, and let all the people say Amen, that the blood of our fathers may not cry from the ground against us. Sacred is the memory of that blood which brought us for our liberty. Signed, Joseph Smith Jr., George W. Robinson, Thomas B. Marsh, D.W. Patten, Brigham Young, Samuel H. Smith, George M. Hinkle, John Corll. So put that on a t-shirt. That's a larger motto. It's usually longer than what I would say is a motto, but, what's the motto with you? I shouldn't have said that. Anyway, all right, moving on. We get some paperwork. We get some receipts. We get stuff. We then get a meeting on the 24th of March where James Newberry accuses John Murdoch of unchristian-like behavior towards some youth. Felt he was a little too harsh with him, came down on him a little too hard, punished him. And the council actually sided with John on this one. John Murdoch said, no, he's fine. I sort of reprimanded James for bringing such an accusation, which leads us to Section 113. Now, Section 113 is kind of interesting. There are 2 parts that are found in this same Joseph Smith journal we've been talking about. And the first one is on page 17, and the next one's on page 18. So these are a lot like disparate. These are right next to each other. So anyway, Joseph Smith Papers has these down as Part A, which in today's terms would be verses 1 through 6. And Part B is going to be verses 7 through 10. Now, the earliest copy that we get is found in Joseph Smith's journal, this sort of March to September 1838. This is the handwriting of George W. Robinson, and it does have some slash marks through the text. I've said this before. It seems to be happening a lot. We also get this in the manuscript history that makes up what we now call History of the Church, Volume 3. And that's all you get. So some circumstantial introductions to this whole thing. We get, quote, Quest on Scripture. That's in the original, like questions. Part 2 of this says questions by Elias Higbee, which is all underlined. So I guess questions from a different person this time. We also get in our modern section headings, they're pretty much the same, but we're just going to be removing History of the Church Volume 3 references now instead of Volume 2. So, and it's also interesting to me that in both copies, 1981, 2013, it just says March of 1838 because we don't really know. So we don't really get a lot of introductions. So the historical introduction gives us this. Sometime in mid or late March 1838, after Joseph Smith arrived in Far West, Missouri, he apparently answered a series of questions regarding the prophecies in Isaiah chapters 11 and 52. The questions and answers were inscribed in Joseph Smith's scripturary book by George Robinson, which is also the journal that we're talking about. No authorship was attributed to the questions and answers, although some of the answers begin with, "Thus saith the Lord." Joseph Smith's authorship is implied. in that some of the answers are couched in the language of Revelation, similar to other revelations transcribed in the scriptury book. Further, most of the documents transcribed in the book are explicitly Joseph Smith documents. So we're making our best guess. So why are there two parts when they're on basically the same page? It says, however, the 5 question and answer pairs were inscribed in the scriptury book under 2 headings. The first 3 pairs appear under the heading Quest on Scripture, while the remaining 2 appear under the heading Questions by Elias Higbee. These headings are comparable to the other headings of the scriptury book that were used to demarcate different document transcripts. The first 3 questions posed by an unidentified interlocutor regard Isaiah chapter 11, while the other 2 questions posed by Elias Higbee concern Isaiah chapter 52. Additionally, whereas the first 3 questions were answered with "Thus saith the Lord" responses and other questions were not, these differences further suggest that what seems to be indicated by the distinct headings, that the 2 sets of questions and answer pairs were considered separate, albeit obviously related texts. So when did this happen? Again, all we get is like March 1838, but when did it happen? It said, this pair of Kirtland documents raises the possibility that some or all of the questions and answers also date back to the Kirtland period. However, the similarities in the format and the subject of the 2 sets of questions suggest that all of the questions were posed and answered in the same setting. Further, the fact that some of the questions were posed by Elias Higbee, who had been living in Caldwell County, Missouri since 1836, had been serving on the Zion High Council in Far West, indicates that the questions and answers date to the period between after Joseph Smith arrived in Far West on the 14th of March. It's kind of the earliest it would have been. So there is a difference in the interpretation of these scriptures from the traditional readings of Isaiah. The main difference here is the implication that some of these things are actually referring to a latter-day individual, perhaps Joseph Smith, instead of maybe an individual from the New Testament. So let's get into the content and footnotes of this. I'm just going to kind of distill down what these questions and answers are. So part 1 of this, the stem of Jesse is Jesus Christ. Answer number 1. Question number 2, what is the rod that's spoken of? It says, a servant who is a descendant of Jesse and Ephraim, who is unto who is laid much power. What that means. Question about what is the root of Jesse, which is a descendant of Jesse who has the priesthood and keys for the gathering in the last days. So footnote to this question says, on the 10th verse of chapter 11, Isaiah prophesies that the, quote, root of Jesse would stand for an ensign of the people, unquote, while the 11th and 12th verses foretell that the Lord would set up, quote, an ensign for the nations and assemble the outcasts of Israel, unquote. The 13th verse states that the enmity between Ephraim, which is the northern kingdom of Israel, and Judah, which is the southern kingdom, would be resolved. Joseph Smith's answers to the second and third questions suggest that the root of Jesse spoken of in verse 10 would reunite Judah and the northern tribes in part by being a descendant of Joseph through Ephraim as well as of Judah through Jesse. So there could be some person in the future that will somehow unite these tribes back together again. They can interpret that as like Joseph Smith doing missionary work, or it could be some like geopolitical thing, in my opinion. So amateur historian. So chill out. Footnote 4 for this says, in response to a question regarding another passage in Isaiah, Joseph Smith explained that there is a hereditary right to the priesthood. Which is not exactly what we teach today, but there you go. Footnote 5 for this also says, according to Joseph Smith's revelations in writing, the keys he received allowed him to unlock the mysteries of heaven and divine authority. So some questions and answers from part 2. What is meant by putting on thy strength? It means putting on the authority of the priesthood. What does it mean for Zion to loose the bands of her neck? And those bands are the curses of God that are still upon Zion in their scattered condition. And this points to a gathering of Israel as part of the missionary efforts of the church and the reason for the priesthood and keys being restored and the establishing of Zion as part of the great work of the church that is supposed to perform. So there you go. That's section 113 as we have it today, some questions and answers. We then get a letter to the Kirtland presidency telling them about the removal of W.W. Phelps and John Whitmer and their replacements, who are now Thomas B. Marsh and David W. Patten, and other things they squared away while they were down in that area. We get some pay orders. We get a statement of accounts. We get a letter from David Thomas, who wanted to sell land to Joseph and Emma near a place called DeWitt, which they actually eventually purchased and moved there. So that's interesting. We get a meeting on the 6th of April, 1838, so we're now celebrating 8 years of the church now. Missouri needed to be squared away because they lost their, not only the presidency and their scribe, but also their historian. So these minutes are in the Elders' Journal, and it's sort of making sure that those callings are fulfilled. On day 2 and 3 of this, which is April 7th and 8th, was a reorganization of the church, calling new presidencies over the quorums, getting things straight, since the dissents were cleared away in Missouri. We get a resolution from this meeting, which is interesting to me. It says, voted by a general conference of the ordained members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, assembled in Far West, Missouri, April 6, 1838. And yes, you heard that right. We just talked about the entire name of the church. That all licenses hereafter should be signed by one of the first priests of the church, as priests of the general recorder as clerk. So presidencies, but whatever. All the others, of course, will be considered fraud after this date. Far West, Missouri, April 6, 1838. Joseph Smith Jr., Sidney Rigdon, Hiram Smith are presidents of the church. George W. Robinson, Recorder General. We then get a letter to John Whitmer after he was outed, and it's not a very nice letter, but I enjoy 19th century insults, so I'm going to read this to you. It says, quote, Mr. J. Whitmer, sir, we were desirous of honoring you by giving publicly to your notes on the history of the Church of Latter-day Saints, after such corrections as we thought would be necessary, knowing your incompetency as a historian, and that your writings coming from your pen could not be put to the press without our correcting them, or else the Church must suffer reproach. Indeed, sir, we never supposed you capable of writing a history, but we're willing to let it come out under your name, notwithstanding it would really not be yours, but ours. We are still waiting to honor you, if you can be made to know your own interest and give up your notes, so that they can be corrected and made fit for the press. But if not, we have all the materials for another, which we shall commence this week to write. Your humble servants attest Joseph Smith Jr., E. Robinson, Sidney Rigdon, Clerk, presidents of the whole Church of Latter-day Saints. Yeah, we thought you were kind of incompetent. You kind of were terrible at your job, and you want to give us your notes, you can. Not a very nice letter. John, wouldn't you believe it, didn't give his notes back. Actually wrote his own history, which was kind of against the church, which we actually have in Histories Volume 2. So yeah, anyway, he's out. And we get some fun little insults there. We get a promissory note, and we light into the last thing for the night, which is section 114. This is a pretty short revelation here, actually. So the earliest copy we get is from this same Joseph Smith scriptural account, or the scriptory account, if you will, journal, March and September 1838. It is in the handwriting of George W. Robinson, again with the slash marks. Don't know what that's about. And it's a pretty short revelation. So it's also in a later Joseph Smith history, which we now call the History of the Church, Volume 3. That's all you get. The introductions to this, the journal says, Revelation to D.W. Patten, given April 11th, 1838. The history that's given here says, Tuesday, 17, Revelation to D.W. Patten, I received the following revelation given at Far West, April 17th, 1844, which actually is supposed to be 1838, so they made a mistake there. The only change to our current section headings is the date used to be April 17th. It has now been corrected to read as April 11th, which I guess 7 and 11 can look very, or 17 and 11 can look very similar. And then we get this from the historical introduction. On the 11th of April, 1838, Joseph Smith dictated a revelation for David W. Patten, directing him to settle his business affairs and prepare for a mission. At the time, Patten and fellow Apostle Brigham Young were serving as assistants to Thomas B. Marsh in the pro tempore presidency over the church in Missouri. This appointment was apparently temporary because, as members of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles, Marsh, Patten, and Young were eventually expected to travel, proselytize, and supervise the church conferences and branches outside of Zion and its stakes. That is, outside of the main church congregation in Missouri and any other places designated for gathering. Now, Elder Patten was in a lot of debt. and he felt like he couldn't leave. And so we get this from the footnote to this introduction. Patten submitted the following written request, quote, "I am in debt and want to go away. Will the church pay my debts and take me for the same and let me go and preach the kingdom of God?" Unquote. Interesting statement. Content footnotes for this. It's very short, so I'm just going to read the whole thing. It says, "Verily, thus saith the Lord, it is wisdom in my servant D.W. Patten that he settle up all his business as soon as he possibly can, and make a disposition of his merchandise, that he may perform a mission unto me next spring, in company with others, even 12, including himself, to testify of my name and bear glad tidings unto all the world. For verily thus saith the Lord, that inasmuch as there are those among you who deny my name, others shall be planted in their stead and receive their bishopric. Amen." Footnote 1 for this says, Patten moved to Caldwell County, Missouri by April 1837. In June, the Zion Presidency and High Council gave Patten a lot in Far West. He may have been operating a business from this lot. So that is the business he's talking about. And he was actually part of not sustaining certain men in their calling. So we get this from footnote 4. It says, "In the quarterly conference held on the 7th and 8th of April of 1838, Patten represented the quorum of the 12 apostles and reported he could not recommend that the conference participants sustain William E. McClellan, Luke Johnson, Lyman Johnson, or John F. Boynton as apostles. He also spake somewhat doubtful of William Smith." So his job was to raise his voice if he found a problem, and that's what he did. Now, Luke, Lyman Johnson, John Boynton get disfellowshipped from the quorum of the 12. William E. McClellan and William Smith kind of live to fight another day, but they kind of go down as well. So those are just a few problem children that remain so in the history of the church. So what's the aftermath of this? Well, the historical introduction for this gives one last thing. The 11th of April, 1838 revelation to Patten, probably dictated in Far West, stated that Patten would be sent on a mission the following spring and implied that he would go with the other apostles. Another revelation received about 3 months later specified that in 1839, the 12 apostles will depart to go over the great waters and there promulgate my gospel, suggesting they would serve a mission in Europe to follow up the success of Kimball and Hyde's mission in England. Patten, however, was killed in October of 1838 in the conflict between the Latter-day Saints and other Missourians. And David Patten, therefore, is considered by some to be the first martyr for the Latter-day Church. Now, what happens here? This is called the Battle of Crooked River, and this is where I'm going to end you tonight, is a little bit that I got from Wikipedia because I am the amateur historian. Patten died due to wounds received at the Battle of Crooked River. This conflict was primarily caused by deteriorating conditions between Mormon settlers and other religious groups in Missouri. As tensions between Mormon and non-Mormon groups increased, a group of men from the state militia abducted 3 Mormon men on October 24th. In response, Patten led a group of Mormon men to rescue the men. Before daybreak on the 25th, as the Mormon militia approached the ford where the state militia was camped, a non-Mormon guard, John Lockhart, called out, "Who goes there?" and immediately fired at the Mormons. The shot hit Patrick O'Banion, one of Patten's guides, and mortally wounded him, crying, "God and liberty." Patten ordered a charge and led the Mormon militia in the attack. Patten, who was serving as commander of the Mormon militia group, was shot in the bowels. The 3 men who had been held by the state militia were rescued. The wounded Patten was carried from the battlefield to the home of Stephen Winchester, 4 miles distant. En route, he was visited by Joseph Smith, Hiram Smith, and his wife. Patten reiterated his testimony of the church to his visitors. Upon seeing her husband dying, Ann Patten exclaimed, "O God, O my husband, how pale you look." His final words to his wife were, "Whatever you do else, oh, do not deny the faith." After which he addressed the others in the room. Moments after this, about 10 p.m., he died. Regarding Patten's death, Joseph Smith said, quote, "There lies a man who has done just as he said he would. He has laid down his life for his friends." Unquote. Patten was buried in an unmarked grave on the 27th of October, 1838, in Far West, Missouri. And we get quite a response from the governor from this. We get this again from Wikipedia. Shortly after the Battle of Crooked River, Missouri Executive Order 44 was issued by Missouri Governor Lilburn W. Boggs. Only days later, the Latter-day Saints living in the community of Hans Mill were attacked by a mob and experienced many casualties. These events ultimately led to the expulsion of the Latter-day Saints from Missouri. So we have a handwritten copy of this, if you want to take a look, which states this. Your orders are, therefore, to hasten your operation with all possible speed. The Mormons must be treated as enemies and must be exterminated or driven from the state if necessary for the public peace. Their outrages are beyond all description. If you can increase your force, you are authorized to do so at any extent you may consider necessary. This order, this extermination order in the United States of America, in the state of Missouri, issued here, lasted, that it was actually legal to kill somebody if they professed to be a part of a religion. This was on the books for 138 years. So from 1838 to 1976, it would have been technically legal to kill a member of the church because that was the order. Now, we want to give our thanks to Kit Bond. This is the governor who officially rescinded the extermination order. So he was the governor of Missouri in 1976, and that year is significant for the following reason. The biggest thanks that I personally would like to give would be to Lyman F. Edwards of the RLDS Faith, or the Reorganized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. He invited Governor Bond to a state conference for the United States bicentennial as a goodwill gesture. The state conference itself was actually in 1975, and it had a powerful effect and actually caused the governor to rescind officially the order and to apologize, because these people who are now the community of Christ are the same people. They were all, their ancestors went through the same thing. So once again, just to close this off, I wanted to say a very public thank you. Not only has the Reorganized Church and the community of Christ gone through so much and preserved so much of what we are enjoying here with church history, but they are one of the reasons for reconciling and making right a very, very wrong thing. So the governor got some bad data and basically said it is okay to kill a Mormon. And they did. They went to Hans Mill and massacred a lot of people, and no one ever got punished for it. And so a very big thanks to the courage that must have taken and for the resolve that must have taken on the bicentennial of the United States founding. So I thought that was a very special story and hopefully a good way to end our episode. Thank you again for joining, and we will see you next week on Filling in the History.